You leave the WWF in 1991. This is your first stint around like August time. I think that's when you stopped wrestling. And you stopped wrestling to look after your ailing father,
Correct.
who had emphysema, I believe. When did you start getting into teaching full time?
When I left WWF in 1991, I actually believe it was late 90. Maybe I'm getting mixed up on the years. It was late in the year whenever I left because I picked up the teaching gig when I got home. Obviously, I started to work, and I picked up the teaching gig. It was mid-year, so it must have been January that I started teaching. Fortunately for me, my ex-wife's a good friend of hers taught for what was called the Beaver Valley Intermediate Unit, which used to oversee and spearhead the special education classes in Beaver County. And so they would rent rooms out around the county in different schools. So I was teaching in a building in a school district called Rochester, which is right next door to where I live. And but it wasn't a Rochester class. Like I wasn't answerable to those administrators. I was my administrator would float around and come around a couple times a week. So I started teaching. Luckily, nobody else wanted that classroom. People that had special ed degrees didn't want it because it was what they said the bad kids, right? It was then called social emotionally disturbed. They've changed it because you can't use words that are negative, I guess, and it's now emotional support, or it was whenever I ended. Nobody wanted it because the kids were all fighting, very aggressive, and me being a professional wrestler, that wasn't going to be so much of a problem. The ironic thing is that the state of Pennsylvania gave me an emergency certification, and when I went in there, I had more success with those kids than all the special education teachers did. Because I treated them like normal kids, like just routine classroom, but I also didn't allow them the leeway to act like knuckleheads. It's like my teachers never allowed me to be, and trust me, I'm a knucklehead. The kids rebelled a bit at the beginning, but I think they fell into it to the point to where my kids would defend me up to the kids, like when they'd go to lunch and some of the other kids up there was a fake wrestler or whatever. My kids would get into fights with them defending me because they knew I had their back. I told them, I said, as long as you don't leave me hanging and you're on the right side of it, I'll back you up every time. And I did. And the kids got to appreciate and respect that.
Why did you end up going into a lot more like special education rather than regular? Was it just because you knew you could handle these kids better than most people, or was this a choice, or was this just where you were allocated?
Well, it was, again, in mid-year, the teaching jobs are really hard to come by in the middle of the year. And nobody else wanted that classroom. I'm a certified social studies teacher. I teach the Constitution, U.S. history, world cultures. Nobody else wanted that. So the state of Pennsylvania had to grant me a emergency certification. When they can't find a teacher to cover a classroom, they can grant a certification like that. And I had some special education courses. So it wasn't a big divide for me. I did that for 2 years. And at the end of the second year, there was an opportunity open. Not that I was having fun doing it. I enjoyed it. But a job opened up in my field in probably one of the top school districts in the county, the county seat called Beaver, Pennsylvania. And I went and applied for it and interviewed and ended up getting it. So to me, I thought, like, hey, this is going to be great. I'm going to be teaching the stuff that I know and have a real affinity for. And to be truthful with you, I did enjoy it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the special ed kids. When you were working with those kids, first of all, labeling them special ed kids sort of like gives like sort of a negative connotation, I guess. These kids were all very highly intelligent, just weren't motivated. I had a talk with one of the parents one time. One of the kids was being just savaged. The 8th grade kid was coming to school, and he was a big kid, bigger than me at that time. And, at that age, you start to get body odor and, deodorant and that sort of, clean up a little bit. And I called his mother in, and this is a tough subject to broach with somebody, and I'm tap dancing around it. And I finally got to it. I said, look, the other kid's really making fun of him. And if you could just make sure he has a clean shirt on, throw some deodorant, brush his teeth, brush his hair, that kind of thing. I said, I don't want to see this kid getting savage, but, kids in 8th grade can be brutal. And this mother said to me, I wanted to come over to the table at her. She said to me, I would really like to do that, Mr. Martin, but unfortunately, I'm not a morning person. I just can't seem to get up in the morning. And I thought, I just told you your kid is getting savaged by the other kids, and you can't wake up. Like, my God, it was just, and it was that kind of thing that really dissuaded you from wanting to continue doing it. I loved working with kids, but when you're dealing with parents like that shouldn't own a dog, let alone a kid, uh, you just go like, wow. Being a father now, I could not imagine if a teacher came to me and said something like that, going, yeah, I'd like to help, but geez, I'm not a morning person. Crazy.
Where are so you've just said that you love working with the kids and more of the administrative side, and dealing with some of the parents was an issue as well. Going to modern days and teaching, so I imagine that you've got friends as teachers, and it's different. It's not that different in America than over here, because my sister-in-law is a teacher. One of my best friends is a teacher. They hate it. They hate dealing with it because all over the years they seem to have got more work, less autonomy, and is that the same in America as far as you know as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the friends that I do know younger people that are teaching, like, beginning there at the starts of their careers, but the majority of people that I speak to are people that have just recently retired or are close to retirement. My ex-wife, for instance, she loves teaching. I mean, she's a very good teacher, and she said, like, every year I've got 3 years that I can't wait to get out. And it's the same thing, right? When you're hamstringing, look, if I can't have control of the classroom. If you could stand up and go off and rant and cut a promo on me and walk out and upset your desk and everything else, then if you're sitting next to the student going, then how could you possibly be learning anything? And so the amount of money, and I'm sure England's the same, we dump money. Back in 93, 4, and 5, when I was teaching at Beaver, we were spending per capita in that school district $25,000 per kid then. I can only imagine what it is now. I would dare say that was double what I paid to go to college my final year of college to Bethany. I would dare say that I probably was getting a little bit better education for my $12,000 than they were getting for their $25,000. It really is criminal because the taxpayers are really getting screwed. The students are really, really being shorthanded. And I'll give you a quick story of what I was teaching back then that'll sort of show you the front end of this. I was teaching early 20th century progressivism, right? This is where the FDA comes in, public sanitation, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. It's a very interesting, for me, period of history, but for kids, there's no big war you're building to or whatever. So it's a bit esoteric. It's hard to sort of grasp. Well, it's period one, half the kids are sleeping. So I thought, well, it's on the state exam, so it might be important these kids hear this. So I took my teacher's manual, held it up and dropped it, let it smack on the floor, startled the kids awake, right? Like I had done probably 10 million times to me. And right as the book hits, the principal, who later became the superintendent, walks by the door. And he backs up into my doorway and says, Coach, can I talk to you for a second? So I walk out in the hall. He goes, Coach, what was that trick just now with the book? I said, well, I don't know if you saw it, John. I said, I'm teaching progressivism. It's on the state exams and the kids were sleeping. I thought it important they'd be awake to get it, because if those kids fail that test, it's my fault. And the principal, later the superintendent, looked up and down the hall to make sure nobody could hear him. And he leaned in, like speaking, not in a whisper, but a low hush, said, Mr. Martin, we have an unwritten rule around here. If your kids are sleeping, they're not causing trouble, let them sleep. The principal of the school building. So I did, me being the smart ass that I am, I did the same thing. I looked up and down and I said, hey, John, $31,000 a year, you're vastly overpaying me. I can get you a babysitter for a couple bucks an hour. And it was just like this kind of push and pull constantly. The other teachers that I worked with, I had a lot of respect for, very good teachers, and the kids were easy to handle. Some of them, would get a little out of line, and we'd handle that a different way. But as far as teaching the subject, when I look now, and I'll give you again, I can look in real time. My youngest son, is in civics right now, 10th grade in Pennsylvania. You take civics. So I asked him, there seems to be a few things going on in the news that might be interesting to talk about, current events. Kids love talking about current events because there's always a handful that have heard something, have an idea of something. But because everything is so crazy right now, especially in government, this to me as a civics teacher would be like the primo time to want to teach some current events. And I asked him, like, how often do you guys do current events? And he said, we don't do current events then. I'm like, you don't do no current events? And he said, we've never done current events. Then I find out after he comes back from Christmas break that his civics teacher has been out with COVID. I said, okay, well, who's the substitute? And, there's laws here, there's state laws that you have to adhere to. And he said, well, we had a substitute for one day, but he didn't have anything for us to do, so he just let us play on our phones. I said, well, what have you been doing since? He said, when we get to the civics classroom, there's a sign on the door that says, proceed to room 123 or whatever classroom's open, and they go and have a study hall. Now, this has been going, I think he told me last week the teacher's back. So these kids have essentially for over a month had zero input in a class that's a required course to graduate. I'm sure there's probably some COVID rule that allows them to do this. But think about the impact on the kid and the way that we've taught these kids for pretty much a year with this virtual stuff. I don't know about you, but locking me up at 14 years old in my bedroom for 6-8 hours a day, I part of taking the header out the window. An incredible amount of mental health issues going to come off of this, and the deletion of education that we've done to the children, to the students, I think is going to have long-lasting repercussions.
Yeah, well, over here, I don't know if you've heard this or whatever, but we, for the most part, just kept kids in school and just said if you catch it, you catch it. And then, if you get it, just stay home for a few days, do remote learning, and then go back in. That's how we've done it for the most part. We have had lockdowns for schools as well, especially in the earlier days. But as far as I know, in America, in most states anyway, in the less lenient ones with COVID, is everyone staying at home, and as you described,
Yeah, and and where they've sort of, I think, and just a little side, I know it's about wrestling, but where I think they've exposed their Achilles heel is, I walked into my son's classroom, into his bedroom one day, and I wasn't eavesdropping, like I can hear you, I can hear this teacher talking, and I'm one of those dorks that stuff gets in my head and doesn't leave. So I keep hearing this mid-20s-year-old biology teacher talking about CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. And she keeps on saying the phrase, like in different incarnations, CFCs are destroying the ozone, CFCs are melting the ozone. And the third time she said it, she said, and your parents don't even care. Something like CFCs, that was like way back in my history, like high school, early college. So I pulled my phone out, didn't say anything to my son, I pulled my phone out and I typed in CFCs banned. And it popped up March of 86. Anybody out there listening can verify this information. March of 1986, United States and most of the United States, Europe, and most industrialized countries banned them. They have been banned globally since 2010. So I showed my phone to my son. I said, you're being lied to right now. And he read it, and I said, raise your hand, which you click an icon, your icon lights up. He keeps pushing the icon, says, she has it turned off, Dad. I said, well, turn your microphone on. Thank you. Now go to the real coffee here. I said, turn your microphone on and tell your teacher you have a question. She had it turned off. Now, again, having been a teacher, I can't imagine a reason why I would ever ask or make it that my students could not ask me a question. That's called the teachable moment. When the students ask me, they're going to learn. So I knew in that split moment, there's one of two things going on here. Either we have a biology teacher who is woefully misinformed in her field, or we have somebody that's lying to her students. The fact that she had the stuff turned off, the icons and things turned off, a microphone, tells me she knew she was lying to students and was trying to brainwash them. Every taxpayer in Freedom School District should be up in arms over that. There should be a correction issue to the students as to what went on. And I asked myself as a teacher, is there any kind of creative reason that I might have lied to my students? For instance, tell my students, the First Amendment is what gives you your right to own a gun in America, and then a week later say, well, I was actually kidding you. It's actually the Second Amendment. What happens if James is not present that day in class? You're going to go forever thinking the First Amendment gives you gun rights, right to bear an arm. So I really came up with zero reasons as to why I would do that. And I think it's done, again, a huge disservice, because that was one class I walked in on. What other lies had been spread in the year that these kids were in lockdown?
Yeah, it always makes me laugh that most people, especially in place of power, will always take the path of least resistance, which seems to be a common theme in many different jobs out there. Just before I move off to teaching, so the years you did teach then, so I'll just tell you when you were, so you took a year off around August 1991 for the WWF. You returned in August 92 to WCW around about that time frame. So you were teaching for what, about 3 years, did you say, before you went to ECW full time?
Give or take, yes. And it was late 93, August 93, I believe. excuse me, that we started, went to ECW. And in the interim there, like you said, there was the WCW. I was at with, excuse me, the IU for the 2 years. I was brought back to wrestling. I got a phone call. Originally, Marty Jannetty and I were going to be put back together in the New Rockers because we had that previous incarnation when Sean had gotten hurt, and Marty had got surprised. Marty had gotten himself into a little bit of trouble, and Kip Fry had rescinded the offer, but still brought me in. And that was when I got put with Steamboat. And then the next year is when the teaching job opened up. So I jumped back and forth. I was hopscotching back and forth then. When I was teaching in Beaver, I was actually still wrestling. So I was going to night class Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays for med school. I was teaching Monday through Friday. Friday and Saturday, I was at ECW. And then Sunday, I was grading papers, creating lesson plans, and trying to catch up on everything else.